What's going on? What is going on, people? This is We Are Reading, and my name is Ellie Wananda. Welcome aboard, guys. Welcome aboard to everyone who's with us live. Shout out to you guys. We've got a couple of people with us so far, so enough respect to you in every aspect. Apologies for being a couple of minutes late, but such is life, innit? Sometimes c'est la vie, as the Francais people say. But yeah, peace and blessings to each and every single one of you. Where are we? Saturday night here in the UK, 9 p.m. And it's been another busy day in Ellie Towers. It's good to. But I like ending these busy days with some African centered reading and discourse and discussion. So it's always a privilege. It's always a blessing. So the book that we're reading at the moment, of course, is Baba Amos Wilson's Blueprint for Black Power, a moral, political, and economic imperative for the 21st century. Written in around about the 1990s, early 1990s. This book was written, published, I believe, in 1998. So we're talking 26 years now, 2024 now. So we're talking 26 years ago. This book was published. A lot of the things that Baba Amos also wrote in this book were clearly written a few years beforehand. I may have said before in some of our previous sessions that when you look at some of the lectures that Baba Amos Wilson gave in that time, at those times, he would sometimes mention the fact that he's writing this book and he was looking forward to the book finally being published and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, it's you probably it was his this is or was his magnus opus, if you like, his big final contribution. It was published. He actually transitioned before the book was published. So it's a wonderful thing to be delving into this excellent, really powerful, really thorough book from this great ancestor. May he rest in power. So yeah, we'll get into it in a minute. Shout out to each of you guys. Tito District, one of my beloved supporters. Peace to you, peace and blessings every single time. Hope you are good. Hope you are well. Hope life is treating you well on this in this bleak midwinter here in the Western Hemisphere, as they say. And then Sugar Booger as well. Sugar Booger 7. Love, peace and love to you. Peace. Peace in every single aspect. And yeah, I'm sure we'll have a few more people joining us as we go along. Please do like the video, and please do share the video as well to help with pushing it out to as many people as we can. I'm just going to do the same thing as well. And yeah, I think I've shared it already to a couple of platforms. So yeah, we're gonna get into this book today. Now, last time round, you remember we were talking about the power. Was it the power? Where is it? Yeah, the power process of the ruling class. Last time round, the power process of the ruling class. And in that chapter, you remember Baba Amos Wilson talked a lot about the sort of the different ways in which the white male power elite uses the political system. But not just the sort of the exoteric political system, but a lot of the behind the scenes. They do a lot of stuff behind the scenes to kind of wield their power and make sure that they get influence at federal level, and all the committees and the sort of the other branches of the federal government, in Congress and House of Representatives and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, basically, one of the key things that kept kind of coming out in that section was that basically you've got, he uses a term, the government within a government, meaning the big corporate interests who were really pulling the strings behind the United States government and making sure that their ideas, their priorities, their preoccupations and their wealth basically was what was the most important thing in driving these things forward. And of course, one of the things to just really be aware of is that Barbara Amos Wilson was writing that in the early 1990s. That was nothing new, because when you go back 100 years before that, or 200 years into the 1800s and 1700s and even the 1600s probably, but all along the way, particularly with the rise of the kind of capitalist era, that's always been the case. The political has always been massively dominated by the business elites. So when you look at the people who are enslaving our ancestors, the people who are colonizing our ancestors, the people who to this day are still continuing those structural power relations, which Osajie for Kwame Nkrumah referred to famously as neocolonialism. It's the same thing, revolving door between the business corporate elites and the governmental elites, the executive branches and all that sort of stuff. So that's what we looked at a lot last time round. And then we also talked, Barbara Amos Wilson also talked a lot about lobbying and how they use these lobbyists to go and curry favor and make sure that, the businesses use their lobbyists to go and curry favor and make sure that their policies are kind of fed into and drip down into becoming like national priorities. So this time round, we're now going to go specifically into the policy formation process, which is chapter 9. Chapter 9 is about 40, 96, yeah, about 40 pages or so. So I imagine we won't finish the whole chapter today, but we'll give it as good a stab as we can. So look forward to that. Once again, make sure you like and share the video, please. Let me just like, share, and subscribe. There we go. Scroll across the banner there. There we go. Add that banner, and boom. Like, share, and subscribe, please, if you would, my beloved people. Shout out to you, Lao Tzu. Always a blessing. Grand rising to you, beautiful ebony people. Yes, indeed. You melanated people. We're not just melanated people. We are you melanated people. The Wazungu them call it you melanin. You is a Greek prefix which means good, and then melanin, melanos, is black. It's good blackness. So we are the people with the good blackness, just according to the Wazungu them. So my beloved fellow you melanated people, and of course, let's just be clear about this: it's we people who are darker than blue, and there's no time for segregating. I'm talking brown and yellow too. So we're a big old spectrum, by the way. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man or woman, you're an African, and you're melanated, and there's no time for segregation with regard to different hues and complexions and all that sort of stuff. And then peace to you, English gal 234. Enough respect in every aspect as well. So yeah, let's do this. Let's get into chapter 9 of Blueprint for Black Power, and the chapter again is called The Policy Formation Process, and my subtitle is Babylon Makes the Rules, which I would have written probably about 6-7 years ago. So let's see why I wrote that as a subtitle. Okay, page 166. Let's go. We may refer to policy rather informally and precisely, yet pragmatically, as the rules of the game, as the rules of power used to organize, direct, and regulate the activities, the production and consumption of the resources, internal and external social relations, and institutions of a society, in order to defend and advance what it perceives as its overall interests. The policy process involves the means whereby a society attempts to reach certain self-defined goals or to satisfy certain social needs, and arrives at the rules by which it will govern its behavior in doing so. All right. This process involves conflicting and collusive interactions between various groups of society who project different perceptions of its goals and needs, and who wish to legitimate and exercise different rules by which the society's goals are to be attained and its needs satisfied. Which group will get its views and rules, or a significant number of them, to prevail and to be accepted as the legitimate views and rules adopted by the society as a whole will depend on the social power and effectiveness of that group compared to other groups. Once rules are adopted and sanctioned by a society, once they are accepted as morally justified, they can themselves be used to justify and legitimate certain social relations, privileges, and prerogatives of individuals and groups relative to other individuals and groups. In the context of our subject, the acquisition and exercise of social power, the social relations with which we are primarily concerned, are power relations between groups, between white people and black people, between dominance and subordination. Page 167. Hence, the policy formation process involves, above all, the process of promulgating, establishing, and enforcing, among other rules, those governing the acquisition and exercise of power, the rules of power. For as Beetham argues, this is Beetham, this guy who Barbara Amos Wilson's quoted quite a few times in his book. As Beetham argues, quote, when power is acquired and exercised according to justifiable rules and with evidence of consent, we call it rightful or legitimate, unquote. Furthermore, as Beetham propounds, quote, to be justified, power has to be derived from a valid source of authority. This is particularly true of political power. The rules must provide those who come to hold power. The rules must provide those who come to hold power to have the qualities appropriate to its exercise, and the structure of power must be seen to serve a recognizable general interest rather than simply the interests of the powerful, unquote. These goals essentially define the outcomes the ruling elite attempts to achieve by means of the policy formation process. The policy formation process is essentially the process of rule creation. As Becker cogently contends, rule creation is an enterprising act. Behind every rule is an entrepreneur or interest group who, for one reason or another, sought to have the rule created and by whose efforts legislation came into being in an effort to defend or advance his or its interest. So in other words, behind every rule that exists and that is widely accepted in a society, there is somebody, someone, some individual, some group, some faction, some sector of that particular society who worked to get that rule put into place. And they brought that rule into being, they pushed that rule, they made that rule become, widely accepted in order to serve their own interests, is the point. So this is echoing what a key theme of this book really is trying to get, Barbara Amos Wilson is trying to get us to understand that in the United States context, but in really any context, when you're talking about I suppose here we're talking about civil society. We're talking about civil society, which includes politics, mainstream politics, but also includes all the other areas of civil society, whether it be, mass demonstrations, campaigning, grassroots organizing, all this sort of stuff. When you look at all those things, it's all about wielding the tools that are available for groups in society and individuals to bring about some thing that we want to bring about. And as African Americans and Africans in general, wherever we're domiciled, that's how we need to be thinking. How are we going to get our interests, our specific interests in that particular area to become respected and protected and served in the political in the political milieu, let's just say. And Barbara Amos Wilson will say primarily, how do we get our economic interests to become mainstream political interests? So continuing on page 167, predominant social power can only be acquired and maintained by a particular group to the extent to which other groups can be systematically excluded from gaining equal or greater power by denying them access to sufficient social and material resources by means of which they may acquire and exercise effective power. Both access and denial of access to these means are usually determined by rules, especially the rules of access and the rules of exclusion. It is through their influence on and manipulation of the policy formation process that dominant or advantaged groups establish the rules or policies which provide them with privileged access to property and resources, the possession and use of which will permit them to acquire and maintain power over subordinate or disadvantaged groups. Sorry, over subordinate or advantaged groups. The policy formation is a reciprocal operation. More specifically, it is a circular process. Right at the bottom of page 167, going into 168, we must be mindful of the fact that advantaged or powerful groups derive their ability to establish the rules of the game from their having achieved by some preliminary means, not necessarily legitimate, the important resources which enable them to impose their self-serving rules on others in the first place. After having initially set the rules, their ability to negate old rules and to negotiate new ones permits them to gain access to more power resources, which in turn enables them to acquire and exercise more power or to retain enough power to protect their interests as long as the social system which makes their power possible retains its basic organizational and functional structure. So you get the power in the first place by whichever means necessary, by any means necessary, and then you set the rules, and then you continually just reinforce the existing power relations, the existing social relations, in order to reproduce your and strengthen your power. It makes me think of DNA, how the purpose of DNA is basically to just keep copying itself, reproduce itself. That's what this is here. And I suppose to create an odd analogy, it's almost like, maybe it's a bit like a virus, isn't it? So just like a virus, a virus needs a host. Viruses can't exist outside a body or a living organism. They have to be in a host. And you can compare a virus to a power elite, such as the white male power elite, if you want to go along with me here. They go over and they usurp some land somewhere, be it, let's call it the North America. They go and kill everybody else there. They kill the people who were there already, and then they massacre a bunch of the people who were there, and then they go to Africa and they kidnap a bunch of Africans and take them over to North America, and through all of this bloodshed and theft and brutality, they create the United States of America. And that's like the virus basically implanting itself in this host through brutality. And then it's like, cool, all right, we've got the Constitution, we've got the Bill of Rights, we've got this, we've got that, we've got the institutions, and it gets more, the media, the fourth military-industrial complex, all these things are all basically designed to replicate and further the power of this virus, being the power elite in this instance. So back to Baba Amos on page 168. Our argument here is that while the federal government may appear to be independent and autonomous, a government of the people and for the people, it is very heavily influenced, if not dominated, by a white male business elite network to the advantage of its members and class, and to a lesser extent, to the trickle-down benefit of the constituents of the white American nation, in general contrast to the marginalized Black American community. The essence of class rule involves the ability of a class, in this instance, the white male business elite class, to influence the structure of government, obtain access to decision-making agencies and positions within government, and the ability to help shape the general political, social, economic, and foreign policies of the government. Governmental policy is not made by the president or by the executive branch alone after approval by Congress. Key point here, if you think about Obama, and people, oh, do you remember 2008? Oh, yeah, 2008. Obama, we've got a black president. Oh, at last. Oh, now it's gonna be great for black people. You know, so many of Africans in America and around the world, particularly around the world, you just seen like the celebrations I was in Uganda in 2008, and people were losing their minds over Obama. They were like, this is so amazing. And I was just, awake enough by that point to know that, no, this ain't going to amount to nothing. But this idea that if we could just get a black person in the hot seat in the Oval Office, then finally we can get our interests on front and center, and they'll look after us and we'll make sure. That's what the kind of idea is. And Barbara Amos Wilson's going to dismantle this in a second. So the president or the Congress or whatever, they don't set the policies. Well, as indicated, back to the book, as indicated by Anchor and all, the image that government decision-making is primarily carried out by the president and his staff working late at night, developing guidelines he will present to a hostile Congress has little to do with reality. They contend that, quote, every important political policy is the result of careful research, multiple authorship, collective judgment, and in most cases, a long period of incubation, and usually the policy-making process will begin outside of government in groups that are established and financed by major business interests. Such groups constitute a corporate policy-making superstructure, which is based ultimately on the intercorporate and interpersonal links which have grown and evolved since the founding of the National Civic Federation, i.e., the first major corporate policy planning organization at the beginning of this century meaning the 20th century, so since the early 1900s. For those among you who maybe don't remember the last century, like some of us do, who were born in that century. The policy planning groups which compose the corporate policy-making network and regulate the overflow and outcome of the policy formation process are not solely concerned with narrow economic interests. The purview of these policy planning groups are nearly all-encompassing, dealing with the issues which extend far beyond corporate business and trade matters. Funded by leading corporations and major foundations, these tax-exempt research and discussion organizations recruit their members from a who's who of prominent individuals from leading American businesses and corporations, government leaders and administrators, outstanding academic experts and researchers. Page 169. The position papers, reports, and related policy proposals produced by the various organizations who are members of the network are often translated into public policy. Their programmatic proposals or recommendations are often translated into guidelines for governmental and American policy in a host of important areas. Domhoff, G.W. Domhoff, describes the nature and function of the policy planning network thusly. And I just want to quickly say, shout out to everyone who's a supporter of my work. If you would like to support, or if you'd like to sign up, go to eliwananda.substack.com and sign up there. Put your email address in there, and just make sure that we can keep in touch via means outside of YouTube. You can financially support, but the key thing is just sign up there. Just go on there now, open another tab, put your email address in there, and make sure that you join the mailing list and get all of these videos as well as my other studies. I'm doing studies on science and nutrition. We are reading extra, or we are reading STEM, I call those, and you'll get the fully referenced papers along with presentation slides and so forth coming up soon, as well as all of the transcripts and full videos of these We Are Reading sessions, such as the series that we're doing now on the Blueprint for Black Power. So talking about all these, this policy planning network, Domhoff describes it as follows. It is within the policy process that the various sectors of the business community transcend their interest group consciousness and develop an overall class consciousness. The staid and dignified policy formation process appears as disinterested and fair-minded as the special interest process seems self-seeking and biased. Only the national interest is of concern. Non-partisan and objective are the passwords. The policy formation process begins in corporate boardrooms and executive suites. It ends in the innermost private offices of the government in Washington. In between the beginning and the end, there are a handful of foundations that provide the experts with money for research, as well as blue ribbon presidential commissions, which legitimate the policies to the general public and present them formally to the president. Research institutes and think tanks also are found in the inner circles of the network, and influential newspapers and magazines are important in bringing the views of the policy groups to the attention of governmental personnel. However, the central units in the policy network are such official sounding organizations as, and hopefully you've heard of these ones, as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Committee for Economic Development, the Business Council, and the American Assembly, which are best categorized as the policy planning and consensus-seeking organizations of the power elite. They are also the training grounds in which new leaders for government service are informally selected. And it says, see page 170. And on 170 here, you're going to have to get the book to see this image. But 170, you've got this policy formation diagram, which kind of lays it all out. So you've got foundations, corporations, personal wealth, universities, national news media, executive agencies, president, congressional committees and courts, and government commissions, councils, etc. And in the middle, you've got policy planning groups. And so it's this web of interlocking web of different kinds of groups and institutions and governmental, non-governmental institutions, and they're all interconnected by things like endowments, grants, personnel moving in between, reports, news items, and so on and so forth. So basically, that's, it's what's the best way of explaining of kind of. It's the way that these people's interests are diffused are through this network, this interlocking web. And so what happens is that people, undiscerning people, or ignorant people, or us, when we're behaving ignorantly, we go to a newspaper article or whatever. We go to MSNBC, or we go to Washington Post or New York Post or whatever. And we read an article and this is pushing some particular policy point, and we think, okay, this is interesting. The media's talked about this, and then we see that something was brought up in some in Congress, some question or some debate was happening. Oh wow, yeah, okay. And then we're on social media and we see like someone shares a tweet about some report that's been released by the American Enterprise Institute or something about some particular, and even I don't know. It's these that gradually, some of these things, if need be, they'll trickle down into like general consciousness. People discussing some of these topics, discussing some policy or another, thinking that people want this policy. This is something that people are talking about. It's on the agenda. It's on the political agenda. Why is it on the political agenda? Because most people want it to be on the agenda? No, because that small group of people who the wealthy business, white male business elite, have used all of these different places in so-called civil society to get it on the agenda, and all the while be sure that they're getting rich in the process of doing so. All of the people involved in these things, media is a thing. But this book, again, written in 1998, a lot of this stuff, I would suggest, didn't really become very widely understood until probably at least a decade later, at the time of the financial crash, perhaps, or as the George W. Bush regime kind of really started developing, and the wars in Iraq and that sort of stuff, that was probably only when people started to start thinking about, okay, what is the American Enterprise Institute? What is the Council for Foreign Relations and so forth? And obviously the internet played an important part in that, because you started to have people on the internet saying, guys, let me tell you all about all these different organizations and so forth, and who's really behind them and so on. Barbara Amos Wilson was visionary in that way. Most of our African people don't know this stuff even to this day. And he was writing about it 26 years ago, older than some of you guys before, since some people watching this video were even born, I suggest. So there we go. Let's listen to Barbara Amos now, at least. Better late than never. Okay, so page 169, we're now on the functions of the policy planning group. Domhoff lists several important functions of the policy planning groups, including the following. Number one, they provide a setting wherein members of the power elite can familiarize themselves with general issues in a relaxed and off-the-record setting. Page 171. Number two, they provide a setting where conflicts within the power elite can be discussed and compromised. Number three, they provide a setting wherein members of the power elite can hear the findings of various academic experts. In some cases, study groups within the policy planning organizations can be characterized as ongoing seminars or briefing sessions for the corporate rich, with experts doing most of the talking. Number four, they provide a framework for commissioned studies by experts on important issues, thereby assuring leaders within the power elite that they have the latest and best information on the subject at hand. Number five, they provide an informal training ground for new leadership within the power elite. It is in these organizations that big business people can determine which of their peers are best suited for service within the government. Number six, they provide an informal recruiting ground for determining which academic experts may be suitable for government service, either as faceless staff aides or to the numerous lawyers and business people who take Washington positions, or as executive branch appointees in their own right. And something that's popping into that I was thinking about as I read those was, you see how organized and carefully laid out this is. And us as African people, I'm loath to say we want to copy this, because ultimately we want something different to this whole system. But we probably want to be thinking about how do we compare to this? Where do we stand on this? How are we even spreading our ideas amongst our community? Are we doing it just through YouTube videos these days? Back in the day, were we just doing it through leafleting and so on, out on the street and big gatherings in theaters and so forth? Probably we absolutely need to do a lot better than that. We need to be a lot more detailed in how we go about talking about the issues at hand. We need to have much more of a, division of labor, I would say. So, allowing people to get in where they fit in. And, if you're good at, the academic stuff, go off and do that. But we'll provide a forum whereby we can come together and hear this evidence and thrash it out and hash it out and come up with kind of, positions that we feel represent our people, So, yeah, that's kind of what popped into my head. Shout out to you, English Girl 234. You asked a question. Always like it when you ask questions and comment. So the comment is: with the information you're armed with, do you find yourself becoming more conservative, moderate, or liberal in politics and economics? Thanks. Good question. It depends, actually. It depends. In a lot of ways, well, I might have to sit with that question for a bit. More conservative, moderate, or liberal? I mean, you probably want to add radical to that, because I would say when it comes to practical politics, the more I read about these sorts of things, and the more I read through this book in particular, the more it probably doesn't really uh, change my overall outlook on politics, which would probably be called kind of liberal slash radical in outlook. But it I do when I think because we're reading all about the practicalities of it all. We're reading about in practice how are policies created, how are they disseminated, and all that sort of stuff. And I suppose reading this stuff, as I just said in my previous statement that I made, I'm probably becoming more prosaic, I should say, in some of the things I think about. As in, rather than thinking, because trust me, I love to go off into like the further reaches of like the edges of philosophy. And so when we're reading books like Sabon for Sommeil, The Spirit of Intimacy, and maybe some of Kindezi Bunseki Fukiao's work as well, like I love to think about, okay, like thinking about African cosmology and spirituality, and envisaging ways in which we might, we were being before the onset of the Ma'afa. I love that, but then like I also these days as well, I'm thinking more and more about, okay, well, that's good and necessary, but also practically speaking, how can we translate some of our philosophy, our African philosophy, our ancient wisdom, and so forth? How can we practically apply that in the day-to-day, here and now? And how can we do so in a way that's going to actually potentially lead to some actual change for our people? And then as I do that, particularly as I read these kind of books, I do start to think a little bit more about, well, how can we negotiate in the political systems that we currently have? How can we create our own policy formation networks, for example? How can we create more connections between our economic, those few of us who have got some kind of economic power or some kind of economic presence? How can we connect them together and that sort of stuff? So in that way, it feels to me sometimes that I'm becoming more prosaic is the word that I'd say. Yeah, more more ordinary in my thinking somewhat. But English Gal, you said that you're becoming more moderate politically and fiscally conservative. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, these are terms that are very much used in the mainstream, aren't they? Socially liberal, fiscally conservative. When it comes, I suppose, fiscally meaning taxation and that sort of stuff. It's a big point. It's a big question because, for example, I think I'm in favor of universal basic income, for example, probably, and I think that I'm in favor of a welfare state, some kind of big, welfare state, because I just think any civilized modern society without a welfare state is not especially it is not a good place. I think the United States is, in comparison with places in Europe and other parts of the world, is just way behind. It's more barbaric in a sense. People talk about, individual liberty, and people should be free and pull yourselves up by the bootstraps, but it's just all mythology, isn't it? And then English Girl 234, just to throw a little hand grenade in there, said, you said you're by no means rich, but still think capitalism works. Well, boy, we have got some reading to do. I mean, capitalism does work. Absolutely, capitalism definitely works for the people who created it and for the people who benefit from it. Some of us benefit as a result, in some way. So you could say I'm doing all right. Like, if you looked at our household income and compared it to the average in this country, it's higher than probably most people in this country, which is kind of shocking because we're not living a life of luxury here by any means, but that just goes to show how terrible things are in the UK in particular. The bar is very, very low, and it's been getting lower and lower and lower. A lot of the things I would say in capitalism that you might say work are not because of capitalism, or are not capitalism per se. It's more, trading. It's just a human thing. People have always traded, predates capitalism. But capitalism as a distinct socio-economic system is a very destructive and anti-human system. Frankly, it survived. It exists in order to profit, which is why you have a whole bunch of homeless people. Because I was talking about homeless because that's the most obvious way of putting it. Homelessness exists in the United Kingdom, the United States, and so forth, in the numbers that it does, because it is not profitable to provide homes for everybody. People are hungry and starving, even in the heart of the United States and the United Kingdom, because it's not profitable to feed everybody. And that completely goes against for me, the principles of African philosophy, which is based on cooperation and communalism and Ubuntu and all that jazz. Yeah, maybe we can continue that conversation. Sugar Bugger, you agree that capitalism works for whom it's meant to work? Yeah, absolutely, it does. It does. I would say as well that all the gains that have been made for, say, working people in capitalism over the last 100 years have come through bitter struggle, just even for the white folks in Britain, in America, in Europe, and so forth. They've had to fight, and they've had to do all sorts in order to get a 7-day working week, in order to get 2 days off, to get a weekend, in order to to improve working conditions and so forth. They've had to fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. Why? Because these things just cut down on profit for the capitalists. And these things are getting rolled back because capitalists always needing to profit. Capitalists will capital. Capitalists will capitalize. So yeah, I would definitely not call myself capitalist. And I capitalism doesn't work for the majority of people, but it absolutely does work for the capitalists. Cool. All right. Good question. Oh, good input there. Anyway, so page 171. In addition to their functions within the power elite, the policy planning groups perform at least 2 major functions for the power elite vis-a-vis the rest of society. So 1, these groups legitimate their members as serious and expert persons capable of government service and selfless pursuit of the national interest. This by virtue of the fact that group members are portrayed as giving of their own time to take part in highly selective organizations which are non-partisan in nature. Kind of deceptive, isn't it? And then number 2, through such avenues as books, journals, policy statements, press releases, and speakers, these groups influence the climate of opinion both in Washington and the country at large. Advisory committees. We shall specifically and briefly describe the roles of the independent research and policy organizations and think tanks presently. However, we should also note another important means by which the corporate elite seeks to shape and direct governmental policy, the advisory committees. Hundreds of these committees help to oversee the functions of government agencies. In 1972, as a result of a Senate investigation, it was revealed that there were between 1,000 and 1,500 of these unknown to the public advisory committees working with and for the federal government during any given year. Many of these committees may consist of scientists, technicians, and academicians who, page 172, evaluate government programs and select recipients of research grants and contracts, or many may consist primarily of people from the industry affected by a particular agency. Where are we? Domhoff, that is. In contrast to and in support of the strategic formulations of the policy planning organizations, the advisory committees and routine part of the governmental policy. In contrast to and in support of the strategic formulations of the policy planning organizations, the advisory committees, a routine part of the governmental policy formation process, help to refine and implement policies which have been adopted by the government. These committees, like their policy planning counterparts, essentially consist of business representatives, politicians, and experts, with the business segment usually overrepresented. Advisory groups usually take one of three forms: blue ribbon, formal, and ad hoc. The Blue Ribbon Advisory Committee is designed to assess or evaluate newly introduced programs. Formal advisory committees oversee operations once policies have been fully formulated. Finally, ad hoc committees are relatively short-term groups which function to advise government on important and critical decisions concerning ongoing programs. Anchor and her colleagues note that an ad hoc group may engage in meetings that are not reported, nor is its existence mentioned with any regularity by the press. Such a committee can arise, function, and die without any public notice. Advisory committees may heavily influence the character and direction of government policies by shaping the information flow into any number of governmental agencies and of executive departments, and by helping to instigate and ensure a smooth and highly remunerative flow of funds from government to the coffers of business and industry interests of their members. The operation of certain advisory committees and their significant impact on policy change and implementation sometimes may exclude the input of relevant public bureaucracies, the cabinet, and elected representatives, thereby leaving it up to the well-represented corporate elite to elaborate and determine official governmental policy. So these are advisory committees. Gosh, when you look at, it's like, it's so kind of intricate, isn't it? All these things, advisory committees, policy formation groups. And it's like, these guys, they're not playing, are they? They're like, it almost feels like kind of like a weird kind of fiction. Like, well, it's not almost, it definitely is like this weird fiction whereby they present this facade of president, I'm the leader, and my party, we're the leaders, and we've got the House of Representatives or Parliament or whatever it is, and you vote for these people, and then we represent your interests on the national scale. But actually, that's just a facade. The reality is that the stuff that the things that they talk about, the things that the policies that basically we find foisted upon us are created by themselves. They create them. The businesses create. It's like it's actually ingenious when you think about it. It's like they must say to themselves, how can we make sure that the government serves our interests? Okay, well let's create this really multi-layer, multi-armed machine to like find canvas opinions between this elite and hear from each other there, and then eventually get them, filter the information into the president and so forth and so on, who they've selected anyway, to make sure that it comes to pass. And you have to kind of take your hat off to them. You have to take your hat off to them, actually, because they're doing an excellent job in that. And it's like what we just talked about, which is capitalism works for the people it's supposed to work for. It doesn't work for us because it's not supposed to work for us, apart from in a sort of, in a residual kind of way. And like, they'll make sure that we benefit in a small way, just to make sure that that we don't sort of rise up and rebel. But yeah, it's impressive stuff, I must say. All of these things. Cool. Sorry about that. So shout out to you, Lao Tzu. You said you asked a question here, which is, do I have a Cash App across the pond? I did have a Cash App, but then I've just had a look at it, and it's been such a long time since I used it that I've got a different card attached to it. So thank you, my brother. What I'll do is I will. Oh, hang on, let's just have a look at it. Can't sign up. All right, yeah. I tried to use to set up a new service thing, but yeah, Cash App is obviously so much better something like a Substack, isn't it? I will definitely get that sorted out for next time. Thank you, my brother, for the support. Thank you, my brother, for asking that. I'll get the Cash App set up so that next time round I will share it widely so that you can help and support the work that I'm doing. So blessed love, my good brother. So there we go. Very fascinating stuff, this actually. And again, Lao Tzu, you said last time around, this is all very contemporary because, of course, we're in American presidential election season coming up very, very soon. Are we going to have Mr. Trump back, the Orange Man back, or is the zombie going to be back again? Biden going to be back, Joe Obama, as I heard him called by some Trump supporters the other day, which I thought was funny. Let's have a look. All right, cool. So here we go. Make sure, please do subscribe. Make sure you subscribe. Please like the video. Everyone can like the video. Everyone can subscribe as well, and everyone can share the video as well. So please do share the video. Just pop a little share on Facebook, Twitter. Facebook, Twitter, wherever the people are at these days on social media. Much appreciated. And tell your friends and family about the streams that we do each week on this channel. So, yeah, cool. Okay, let's talk about this quickly. Get to these. Let's move on. Let's move on. So now we're on page 172. The role of and function of selected influential policy planning groups. Okay. Oh, I see. So the Council on Foreign Relations is a policy planning group. Interesting. All right, let's go. Founded in 1920/21, so celebrated its centenary recently, by East Coast bankers, lawyers, and academicians. This organization, comprised primarily of financial executives and lawyers, and secondarily of journalists and academic experts, plays an unofficial but influential role in shaping US policies and recruiting elites for leadership positions, both Democratic and Republican administrations. Members of this is page 173, members of this and other similar upper-class organizations go on to serve in the highest offices of the nation, i.e. as US presidents, vice presidents, secretaries of state and defense, and have at times virtually monopolized the membership of the National Security Council, the nation's highest official policy-making body. The Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR, was very influential in the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. It publishes the influential periodical Foreign Affairs. Major foundations such as the Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie, with which it has numerous director and executive interlocks, fund many of its special projects. The Council, which intensely concerns itself with the role of the US plays in international affairs, is preeminent in helping to shape US foreign policy. Its New York clubhouse hosts government officials and national leaders from all over the globe of the highest rank and influence as luncheon and dinner speakers, as well as auditors. The Council's discussion groups and policy groups, generally consisting of about 25 business executives, government officials, scholars, and military engineers, engage in detailed discussions of various topics and issues having to do with foreign affairs. These groups attempt and define issues and alternatives, which their general exploration or problem. Attempt and define. I think that these groups attempt and define issues and alternatives, which their general exploration or problems in international affairs imply or suggest. There's probably a typo in there. That sentence doesn't make full sense to me. Let's carry on anyway. The discussion and policy groups play the most important roles in the Council's program. The Council study defines and shapes many US foreign policy initiatives. According to Domhoff, 1979, study groups revolve around the work of a council research fellow financed by Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie Foundations, or a staff member. This group leader and other experts present monthly papers which are discussed and criticized by the rest of the group. The goal of such study groups is a detailed statement of the problem by the scholar leading the discussions. But the work of the council's discussion and study groups is not merely academic, because many of its members are directly involved in making foreign policy in Washington. Many of its members are called on by the national government to assume important posts and to undertake important official responsibilities. It is not unusual for a sizable segment of the overwhelming majority of major appointments to the Senate Department and presidential advisory groups to be and presidential advisory groups to be a member of the council. Yeah, that's something that I used to think about. Like, how do these, when these people are elected to presidential office or prime ministerial office, how do they decide who's going to become their cabinet members and who's going to become their, even beyond that, the next section is the candidate selection process. That's the next chapter. But, how do they decide who are going to become the head honchos in the civil service? And this is how they decide. It's not like, sometimes, it can be, you can think, oh yeah, like, I don't know, when Tony Blair came into power in the United Kingdom here, he went and found the best of the best to become the head civil servants. No, he just went to these think tanks and policy formation groups equivalents here in the UK, and he already knew of various people who had already given him the policies, and he was like, yeah, come and work, come and help me to implement these policies which we've already decided we want to bring about once we come into power. So that's the CFR. Then we've got at the bottom of page 173 going into 174, the Committee for Economic Development. Founded in the early 1940s, it was created by its corporate founders to help plan the post-World War II world, particularly to help avoid a possible post-war depression. It also was designed to present economic plans for the post-war era acceptable to the corporate community and which would block the presentation and influence of economic ideas and plans proffered by other sectors of society, i.e., especially at that time, you're talking about the communist bloc, the workers, working class organizations, the unions and so forth, who were probably feeling pretty in the ascendancy, bearing in mind the Soviet Union had basically just bailed out the West and enabled them to win in their inter-tribal warfare, European tribal war, called World War II. All of this was to be done under the cover of non-partisan national interest. In its early years, the Committee for Economic Development consisted of 200 corporate leaders, later including a small number of university presidents. The Committee for Economic Development, or CED, is advised by leading economists, public administrations, and academic experts. Its policy statements on a broad range of domestic and international issues are developed by study groups aided by academic specialists. The statements are published and disseminated widely in business, government, and media circles. They have had considerable influence in that they are often translated into official policy. CED's staff is relatively small, consisting of about 24 persons and a highly competent research advisory board. Working through subcommittees, CED's 200 trustees meet 200 trustees. Gosh. So they've only got 24 staff, but they've got 200 trustees. Or they had in 1997 or whenever this was written. They meet to discuss policy problems with experts and after lengthy deliberations publish their policy recommendations. CED also commissions numerous research papers from academic experts and publishes them as background papers. In 1988, about 1,300 companies contributed $3.3 million to CED. Private foundations contributed some $370,000. These contributions and others like them support the CED's annual revenues and expenses of about $4 million US dollars. Like the Council on Foreign Relations, many of the members of CED come to serve in government positions both in Republican and Democrat administrations. Yeah, and again, I keep the thought that is just bubbling away in my mind is where are our versions of these things, or what are our equivalents of these things, Maybe they exist in secret. That'd be good. I'd be very pleased if someone turned around and said, actually, bro, we have these, but they're just not widely known, so they don't get taken out by the man. That'd be good. And if that's the case, don't talk about it online here. But I think we probably need to have some public ones, actually, because, the whole point of these institutions is to publicly influence, well, in a semi-public way, in an opaque way, influence national policy. And also, I wonder if there are any equivalents of these in Africa or in the Caribbean amongst Black majority countries. I wonder. And then the last one of these policy formation groups we're going to talk about here is the Business Council. The Business Council was founded in 1933 as an official advisory agency to the Department of Commerce. Since the end of World War II, the group no longer functions as the official advisory body to the Department of Commerce, but it continues to meet as a policy planning forum for inner circle business leaders. Its 154 members listed in Who's Who in America, in combination, held 730 directorships. I almost read that as dictatorships. Probably more apt, actually, but they held 730 directorships with 435 banks and corporations, 49 foundation trusteeships, 125 trusteeships with 84 universities. This organization, whose members are drawn from the ranks of the nation's top financiers, bankers, and industrialists, for example, Chase Manhattan, Morgan Guaranty, GE, GM, meets about 6 times a year with high government officials. During these usually 3-day, strictly confidential meetings held at luxury hotels paid for by private contributions, the council conducts panels, holds informal talks, and presents its views on a broad range of public issues. Page 175. Its views are influential in Washington and significantly influence governmental and bureaucratic policy. Moreover, the relaxed and friendly atmosphere of the council's meetings with high governmental officials, the alternation of discussion sessions with banquet-style dinners, golf tournaments, tennis matches, and other social events, serve to create and maintain feelings of camaraderie, class identity, and consciousness between corporate elite and government officials. This is what you're up against if you're trying to get into power and change it from within. These are the kinds of things that you're up against, which is kind of easy to see why it's impossible to do so, and why the hope that one day some great hope can come in and be the change and change things from the inside is just a pipe dream. And interestingly, last week someone mentioned Donald Trump, and someone mentioned the whole deep state motif or rhetoric. And this is the thing that Trump is so good at, or was so good at, is still so good at, is he speaks about some of this stuff just enough to pique people's interest and to tap into the average white person's kind of suspicion and dissatisfaction with the system. He talks about the deep state and so forth just enough to make it seem to these people that he's on their side and he's here to drain the swamp and all that sort of stuff. But he's obviously part of the system. He came from this system himself. He's part of the business elite and so on and so forth. Yeah, I just that's just an interesting one that like you know you get these people who have the sort of the trappings or the language of being an outsider, like a Trump being an outsider coming in and he's going to take on these entrenched interests and make America great again and all that stuff. Um, but of course he's part of it just as much as anybody else. So we're gonna come back to that in a second. Nice to each and every single one of you who's in the chat and in the stream, the live. Tito District said that's that social engineering. Yeah, all of this is yeah, this is all social engineering. This is how they're doing it, kind of thing. It's almost like but I look forward to the day when people can hear this stuff and be like, well, yeah, obviously we know all this. We know this. But most people do not know this. I mean, I didn't know the details and the intricacy of it. I'd heard of some of these groups. I didn't know exactly how they all kind of fit together. And this is brilliant political theory, I suppose you'd call it. Or political ontology, you could probably call it. Socio-political ontology. This is the system. Baba Amos is laying out the system for us, plain, so that we can see it how it works. And why we get what we get from the system, because it's set up to benefit itself, the business elites, and so on and so forth. English Gal 234. Okay, so you said you take being fiscally conservative back. Okay, you're in favor of taxing the rich, welfare, healthcare, homes for the homeless, etc., etc. Okay, good. Thank you for the clarification. I think with the fiscally, sometimes people think, I don't know. Yeah, like the tax issue is an interesting one. Like, I mean, in my opinion, yeah, basically tax the rich, and actually not just tax the rich's income, because if you're smart or if you've got enough lawyers and planning and so forth, as a very rich person, you can avoid paying any tax. Actually, you get them stories sometimes. Bill Gates paid less tax than a nurse did last year. That's because there's enough in the system, as laid out. All these, the whole point of this chapter is that the rules, Babylon makes the rules. So Babylon has made the rules, being that these are the rules of taxation and so on and so forth. They're established in order to make sure that the higher up the social ladder you go, the less tax you pay. And the lower down the social ladder you go, the more tax you pay as a proportion of your income. So what needs to happen is that the taxation needs to be not just on incomes, but more heavily taxation needs to be on assets, and in particular on things like fixed so land, in particular, and forms, things like that, natural resources and so forth. I think we should put more of the taxation on assets than income, because otherwise it's just very, very easy to avoid paying any tax at all. If you just instead of earning a personal income, you set up some kind of, I don't know, trust, or I don't know what the different things that you do. There's many ingenious ways you can go about to make sure that you don't have to pay any tax. Whereas obviously the average person in the lowest quintile, so, political socio-economic quintile, the lower social classes, all they have is income, and so they're going to get taxed to smithereens. And this is why what was my point? Yeah, it's the same all around the world as well. This is why I can't remember what I was going to say, but yeah, tax people's incomes. Yeah, generally speaking, people at the lower level pay a bigger proportion of and you want to fix that, but the way to fix that is to make sure that you tax people's assets. Lao Tzu, you said, I believe Amos Wilson mentions an African think tanks in this chapter. Okay, cool. Let's have a look at that. Actually, let's see. Chapter, where are we? Chapter 9. Yeah, yeah. That's okay. Toward the end of this chapter, we'll talk about some of those. That's good. That'll probably be next week, though. And then Lao Tzu, you said, back in the day, Steve Coakley spoke about this numerous times. Okay, Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. That is one of those things actually, because there are people in mainstream politics, if you want to put it that way, who are, say, the ones more on the libertarian side of things, or the who are what they are pushing for things like taxation, land value taxation, for example, or and not taxing people's earnings so much, because they reckon, especially if you're poor, if you're a poor person born with nothing, all you've got is your labor. You've got no, mummy and daddy didn't leave you with a house or a property or a company or whatever. You know what I mean? All you've got is your labor, unlike Trump and all these people. All you've got is your body, your physical body. And so you have to do something with your physical body or your mind in order to generate an income. And then you do that. And it's not fair. It's not fair that you should be taxed taxed more heavily on the only thing that you have, which is coming from you yourself, than people who are given handed down resources through the generations, and they can just avoid paying a penny of taxes. In the UK here, I believe they're talking about maybe removing inheritance tax, which would go down well with a lot of the upper middle classes, but of course that would just shift the tax burden even more heavily down, down the social ladder. So where was I? I was talking about so that's right, yeah. So we're on page 175. We've just finished talking about those three policy formation of policy planning groups: the CFR, the CED, and the Business Council. And now we're going to talk about some think tanks. So we'll probably, I imagine we'll get on to, we'll probably do the next kind of 7 or 8 pages, finish off think tanks, and then return back next week to continue with chapter 9. So we talked about think tanks a little bit in the last chapter. So let's get into the think tanks again in this chapter, page 175. The work of influential policy planning organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations and Business Council is reinforced by a coterie of specialized research, information, and expert advisory groups and institutes. Indeed, it's within these think tanks, further supported by university-based research, that the deepest and most critical thinking takes place within the policy planning network. The most important institutions and research centers connected with universities receive much of their funding from foundations. A number of larger and less specialized independent think tanks often undertake contract research for businesses or government agencies. Via think tanks, foundations, university centers, the corporate elite finances a counter-revolution of ideas that would overwhelm the voices of vigilant citizens. They also counter the reign of true democracy in America and ideas and policies which could make it a reality. Since the 1970s and 80s, a period of increasingly conservative ideas and presidential administrations, think tanks such as the American Institute and the Hoover Institute, American Enterprise Institute and the Hoover Institute moved from the intellectual margins to become primary sources of Washington and national opinion. The intellectual output of these and similar centers are utilized to inform and shape the thoughts and behavior of the media and politicians. By 1983, the American Enterprise Institute budget, or AEI, let's just call it, budget, had increased nearly 18-fold from 1965, i.e. from $600,000 to $10.6 million. Wow. This explicitly conservative think tank has over 600 corporate contributors, including Citicorp, 100K, Chase Manhattan, 171K, AT&T, 125K, Chevron, 95K, General Motors, 100K, Exxon, 130K, General Electric, 65K, Procter & Gamble, 165K, as well as the support of corporations like IBM, Morgan Guaranty Trust, Ford, Firestone, and Goodyear. And just Procter & Gamble, if anyone's read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Dr. Walter Rodney, you'll know that Procter & Gamble were very heavily involved in colonialism as well. So when we're talking about these corporate giants and stuff now, just be aware these are the same people, successors, but same entities, literally, sometimes the same names. Unilever being another one. You know, the same entities who 200 years, 150, 200 years ago and further back were heavily involved in in the enslavement of our ancestors, the theft and colonialism of our lands. So let's just understand that these struggles that we're talking about are all connected. It's not like just some discrete little struggle here that African Americans are fighting. Then there's this discrete little struggle here that Jamaicans, and then this discrete little struggle here that Ugandans are facing, and then this discrete little struggle here that Melanesians are facing. No, they are discrete. They've got their own kind of paraphernalia and phenomenology, outward appearance and details, but they're all connected because we're fighting against the same corporations, basically. Located in Washington, D.C., the AEI produces policy prescriptions and intellectual parameters for important political debates and issues. It has argued copiously against the minimum wage, producing some 9 or more scholarly reports on the matter. Page 176. These arguments were obviously favored by their corporate funding sources. Centers like AEI often seek to hide their political biases behind a veneer of disinterested scholarship. The Hoover Institution at Stanford University is another well-funded, over $8 million, in addition to regular corporate sponsors, including right-wing millionaires like Joseph Coors, the beer magnate, think tank, which concerns itself with a range of public policy issues. The Heritage Foundation, yeah, familiar names these, man. The Heritage Foundation aggressively intellectualizes the class objectives of its generally right-wing corporate investors. It is the source of many ultra-conservative legislative ideas and critiques of social programs. This think tank has also received funding from Coors, 100K, to aid its conduct of research and educational activities on major public policy issues. Since the early 1970s, a host of additional right-wing think tanks and institutions have been resuscitated or created. The Institute for Contemporary Studies, under the aegis of Ed Meese, one-time Reagan Attorney General, the Georgetown Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Center for the Study of American Business, were among a number of centers designed to promote, quote-unquote, free enterprise. The latter organization, founded by conservative economist Murray Weidenbaum, who later became chairman of Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors, engaged in strong intellectual attacks against government regulation. It did much to promote deregulation. It must be kept in mind that these conservative think tanks have their moderate and liberal rivals. Okay, here we go. So, in other words, let's not forget, I mean, you made this point earlier, let's not forget that, or let's not fall into the trap of thinking, oh, it's these right-wing groups, they're the ones who are doing all these things. No, it's not just the right-wing groups, actually, because there are a bunch of so-called liberal entities who are doing the same thing. So, to AEI, Hoover, and Heritage may be opposed the Brookings Institute, okay, the Committee for Economic Development, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Oh, so Council on Foreign Relations are what? Liberal, moderate/liberal, are they? All right. The Brookings Institution, formed in 1927, so coming up to a century soon as well, conducts some study groups for government officials as well as general study groups. More importantly, it is a kind of postgraduate school for specialists in a wide range of policy areas. Employing a very large number of social scientists, it functions as a source of new ideas and consultants for policy groups and government leaders. Its board of directors generally overlap with the CED and the CFR. The Brookings Institute, once the preeminent home of liberal intellectuals, has reportedly steadily shifted rightward in ideology and personnel of late, apparently under pressure from its newly financed conservative rivals. We would be remiss if we did not include the Cato Institute in our present discussion. This organization, founded in 1977 as the research and policy think tank of California's Libertarian Party, is one of the most influential corporate bodies in Republican politics and in Washington today. This is page 177. Founded in San Francisco, it moved to Washington in 1981. Neither wholly traditionalist, neoconservative, or liberal, Cato has advanced replacing Social Security with a system of individual retirement accounts, the privatization of the federal deposit, and the savings and loan insurance programs, a phased withdrawal of the US from NATO, and decriminalization of drug use. Okay, a couple of those things sound quite good, if I'm being brutally honest. Cato, though no longer an exclusive libertarian think tank, shares with other libertarian research operations the belief that governmental functions, federal, state, and local, should be turned back to the private sector. Once considered fringe thinkers, Cato's intellectuals exert tremendous influence throughout the capital. For 15 years, a fountain of ideas, books, policy statements, op-ed pieces, and media broadcasts, Cato is now perceived as having significantly influenced the retrogressive politics which characterized the new Republican Congress of 1994. It is currently engaged in developing a handbook which seeks to show Congress what the future government should be like. It is also in the process of advocating the abolishment of the federal domestic departments and giving their powers back to the states. Interesting. And if Baba Amos Wilson was writing 15 years later, say by the mid-noughties, and certainly by now, he would have added in podcasts, I'm sure, into there. And English Gal 234, you posted something about podcasts the other day, and something about your New Year's hope is that no more podcasts will be launched. There are a lot of podcasts, aren't they? And I didn't realize until I'm just seeing them everywhere now. You know, this guy's on a podcast, that guy's on a podcast. What are they called? Drink champs or whatever they're called. Podcasts everywhere. But anyway, all these podcasts and vloggers and so forth and so on, a lot of them are intricately connected, I would imagine, with some of these things. You know, your Cato Institutes and so forth will be spreading their tentacles into the influencers as well. You know, that'd be an interesting thing to see some studies on, you know, about how some of these corporate interests are using TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook we've seen already with the use of the advertising, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, you know, how they use, you know, advertising and so forth, and all the different ways of marketing and so on to spread political ideas. But it'll be interesting to see if there's anything out there studying the use of actual people and individuals to spread some of these ideas. That's something I'm going to bookmark that so I can go back to that as something I want to look at and maybe start doing a bit of research myself. Back to page 177. Cato works closely with Newt Gingrich, the Speaker of the House, on term limitation issues. Two of its senior members went on leave work with Dick Armey, the House Majority Leader, on the Joint Economic Committee. Armey supports Cato's free market ideas about the economy. Representatives Tom DeLay, the House Majority Whip, and Henry Hyde, head of the House Judiciary Committee, have a close relationship with Cato. K. Tucker Anderson, a New York investment banker and Cato board member, is one of Gingrich's chief financial backers. Do you remember that Fuji song, by the way? Speaking of Newt Gingrich, there was that Fuji song that was like, Newt Gingrich sucks, whatever. So, hip hop. Listen to 90s hip hop was very, very useful for my understanding of US politics and the condition of our African brothers and sisters in US politics. Even through your Nas and your AZ and all that, they'll be talking about Pataki this and Giuliani that and da 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 da. And that's how I learned about these people. Who's Pataki then? Got all kind of undercovers coming at me. Who's Pataki? And Giuliani? Who's Newt Gingrich? Who are these people? And I go off and learn that, oh, that's who these people are. So shout out to all of them more conscious hip hop artists that we had back in the glory days in the 1990s, Zimit, and dancehall and reggae artists as well. Where are we? Here we go. Yeah. Another of the chief financial backers for Cato is Charles Koch, heir of the Koch family interest in Kansas oil, gas, and petrochemicals. Cato has also won broad financial backing among conservatives as a result of attacking the Bush administration's moderate Republican stance. And at this point, he's talking about George H.W. Bush's, that's the 1989 to 93. Is that right? Stance. The Koch family, which now contributes about 25% of Cato's $5 million annual budget, has been joined by new donors, including Coca-Cola, Citibank, Shell Oil, Philip Morris, and Toyota. The money is so plentiful that Cato just recently moved into a new $13 million headquarters. With this kind of financial and political clout, Cato was able to garner the most newspaper citations per dollar spent of all but 2 of 21 Washington-based think tanks. Its ideas are frequently presented in the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal. And by the way, the Koch brothers, they are, I believe, they are behind the Tufton Street Mafia here in the UK, who dominate UK politics. So it's just all joins together. It all joins together. Cato demonstrates page 178. This is. Yes. So yeah, it was Lauryn Hill, wasn't it? Yeah. The beautiful lyrics of Lauryn Hill and the Fugees. Yeah, what song was that? I know it was on the Score album, I believe, but I can't remember what song that was. But yes, I. Those are the days when like groups, who weren't in your face political, like the Fugees probably you'd say, not in your face political. They weren't Public Enemy or X-Clan or whatever, but they would drop these lines in there, that were still pretty, showing where they stood. They stood with their people, and they rhymed about their people's struggles very, very, very concretely and clearly, even as they were rhyming about partying and love and this, that, and the other. That's how it should be, Page 178. Cato demonstrates most clearly how the corporate elite develops and funds propaganda agencies, and how such agencies became intricately intertwined with the government and influence its policy directives. Our discussion of think tanks would assume book length proportions if we merely very briefly described the dozens of such organizations not mentioned above. Important organizations like the Rand Corporation, or maybe it's the Rand Corporation who are behind the Tufton Street Mafia. Might be the Rand Corporation, actually. The Urban Institute, the National Bureau of Economic Research, Resources for the Future, and Centers for International Studies at MIT, Harvard, and Georgetown are certainly worthy of further study. The most important thing to note here is the fact that regardless of the scope or political leanings of any number of influential think tanks, they tend to be supported by the same corporations and all represent efforts by the ruling elite to shape governmental and public opinion across broad areas, including foreign policy, economics, social values, and cultural orientations. The corporate elite spends millions of dollars in financing the organizations which further its interests by providing legal help, free advertising space in newspapers and magazines, and a variety of free services for organizations in the policy planning network, and by serving as the directors and trustees of these organizations. By these means, the corporate elite seeks to determine the general direction of such organizations, as well as to select the personnel who will manage their operations. Efforts by the ruling elite to shape opinion in vital social areas are extensive. The work of the Joint Council on Economic Education illustrates these efforts skillfully. Receiving much of its initial funding from the Ford Foundation at its foundation in 1949, and receiving the bulk of its current funding from corporations and corporate foundations, this organization seeks ostensibly to enhance general, quote, economic literacy, unquote. It seeks to determine the parameters of the field of economic education through its promulgation of a variety of programs designed to influence the teaching of economics. The extensive efforts of the Joint Council on Economic Education to influence the nature of economic education in America may be gleaned from the following statements by Bonhoeff. And I think we will close at the end of this particular section, and we'll pick up again next week for the remainder of the chapter. Quote, at the most obvious level, it publishes books, pamphlets, movies, and teaching aids and provides school systems with curriculum guides and the literature and films of affiliated corporations. Equally important, it seeks to change the views of teachers through council-sponsored classes and workshops. These efforts began in the late 40s and early 50s with in-service mini-courses and summer workshops. The program expanded to the point where, in 1974, for example, 17,000 teachers participated in the in-service workshops and 2,500 took part in 84 summer workshops, page 179. Graduates for the early workshops provided the Joint Council with the basis for local and regional councils designed to give support to economic education in schools. However, the backbone of the Joint Council strategy is its program in the 122 council-affiliated Centers for Economic Education at colleges and universities in 48 states. By the late 70s, over 3/4 of the teacher training programs in the country required social studies teachers to take an economics course, and the percentage of elementary teachers taking economics courses for teachers had risen from 13% to over 1/3. Okay. The program of the Joint Council then begins in corporate boardrooms and foundation offices, flows through affiliated councils and university centers, and ends up in teacher training programs and public school curricula. In that regard, it is an ideal example of the several steps and organizations that are usually involved in attempts to shape public opinion on any domestic issue. However, the level of economic illiteracy, according to polls taken for the corporations, remained as high in the 1970s as it was in the 1940s. Okay, unquote. Referring to an organization such as the Joint Council referring to the role an organization such as the Joint Council plays as a part of the corporate sponsored elite and financed ideology network, Bonhoeff contends that their most important role may involve the network's ability to help ensure that an alternative view does not consolidate to replace the resigned acquiescence and lack of interest in policy issues that are found by pollsters and survey researchers to permeate the political and economic consciousness of Americans at the lower levels of the socio-economic ladder. So yeah, I think I will just do this last little section here, because the next 2 pages are about leading think tanks. So we'll finish the next 2 pages on think tanks, and then we'll pick up again for next week in the last part of the chapter. So there are this section is the leading think tanks. There are over 1,000 think tanks in the United States. Some fade in and out of favor depending on political and social circumstance. Some endure and increase in influence across the years, having somehow mastered an adaptational fluidity which allows them to respond positively to political and social change. The list which ensues was adapted from the more detailed one developed by James D. Smith. Our intention here is merely to acquaint the uninitiated reader with the names and the general orientations of some of the more prominent and influential think tanks of the last 15 years, so i.e. from about the late 1970s, early 80s to the late 1990s. American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy Research, founded as a business research group in 1943 and one of Washington's most influential policy research centers, this politically conservative institute's research program is organized in three broad areas: economic policy, foreign and defense policy, and social and political studies. In addition to its bi-monthly publication, the American Enterprise AEI publishes 40 to 50 books each year and disseminates hundreds of articles and op-ed essays. Now, do you know what? I might skip some of these because we've talked about these already. So we've got the Brookings Institute. We've talked about them. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I'll just read this. Founded in 1910 with a $10 million grant from Andrew Carnegie, this institution uses its approximately $85 million endowment to support its interest in international relations. It has published its influential quarterly journal, Foreign Policy, since 1970. That's interesting because I follow foreign policy on Twitter, and oddly, they can be quite. So recently, for example, they've been very critical of Israel quite a lot in regards to their treatment of Hamas. Currently, they've got articles going around criticizing the way that the military in the US has become like a family business more than anything else. So that's interesting. Cato Institute, we've talked about them already. The Center for Strategic and International Studies. All right, what's this? This institution, with some 50 senior researchers amongst its 147 member staff and network of adjunct scholars, senior associates, and counselors, describes its mission as providing a strategic perspective to decision makers that is integrative in nature, international in scope, anticipatory in its timing, and bipartisan in approach. That sounds kind of good, doesn't it? The way they... The center publishes the Washington Quarterly and generally co-publishes with commercial and university presses books designed to deal with such matters as arms control and technology, international business, energy and environmental issues, international communications, and political military issues. It supports specialists who focus on regions such as Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, interestingly. So that's the Center for Strategic International Studies, and they've got the Washington Quarterly. Then you've got the Committee for Economic Development. We've talked about that already, CED. The Economic Policy, this is on page 181 now. The Economic Policy Institute, founded in 1986 only. This politically liberal institute is designed to counter what it perceives as a major shift to the right in the national policy debate. It seeks to encourage more active government intervention in the economic and social life of the nation, backed by a coalition of unions, such as the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the United Steel Workers of America, the United Mine Workers of America. The Institute concerns itself with living standards, the labor market, unions, trade policy, and economic competitiveness. So that's important to kind of show that all this think tank stuff and whatnot is not just some right-wing thing, although it's largely dominated by corporations and is mainly right-wing. There are the odd outliers who are a bit more to the other side of the political bird. Still the same bird, though, as the saying goes. Then you've got the Heritage Foundation. I think did we read about this one already? The Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation. No. All right, the Heritage Foundation. As the flagship of the New Right, quote unquote, this intellectually conservative establishment, founded in 1973 by a group of conservative legislative aides, seeks to cultivate a new generation of conservative leaders who will become directly involved in the Washington policy process. The Foundation's research program focuses on foreign policy, defense studies, hemispheric development, Asian studies, domestic and economic studies. That Asian studies is pertinent because obviously 1998, China would have been, really, they'd done their liberalization, economic liberalization in the 1980s. And by the late 1990s, they would have really been looming in the rear view mirror of the United States, or rear view mirror in the United States, like, so that's interesting. It produces over 200 publications, including its journal Policy Review, with a paid circulation of over 15,000, and the annual guide to public policy experts, which lists nearly 1,500 conservative experts in various important fields. It has been noticeably successful in disseminating its programmatic publications and policy proposals via the mass media. How many more have we got? I might. Oh, no, I won't skip these. So we've got the Hoover Institute on War, Revolution and Peace. So funded by a gift from Herbert Hoover. I'll maybe skim these last ones. They very heavily focused on international and domestic policies and so on and so forth. I wanted to. Oh, hello. Here we go. Look, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. This is right at the bottom of page 181. The center was founded in 1970 by a group of Black intellectuals, politicians, and professionals with the financial backing from the Ford Foundation and under the auspices of Howard University and the Metropolitan Applied Research Center, directed by Kenneth Clark. Its current objectives include its research, publication, and educational efforts to improve the socio-economic status of Black Americans, to increase their influence in the political and public arenas, and to facilitate the building of coalitions across racial lines. This is page 182. The center sponsors training and technical assistance programs for Black elected officials and publishes a magazine called Focus, aimed at Black political leaders. Its central concerns presently involve research on public policy and the incorporation of economic issues into its program of political and social research. The center is concerned very much with urban poverty, educational achievement, minority businesses, African affairs, and human rights. It publishes about half a dozen books each year and has produced well-researched or well-regarded radio and television programs. Interesting. So what was that called? That's the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. Check out that, see if it still exists. And then the last one here, which piqued my interest, is called Manhattan Institute of Policy Research. Originally known as the International Center for Economic Policy Studies in 1978, it was renamed the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research in 1981. This politically conservative institution has supported, along with a provocative program of lectures and conferences, controversial authors such as George Gilder, Wealth and Poverty, and Charles Murray, we've all heard of him, who completed Losing Ground under its aegis, and then authored the very controversial The Bell Curve. This organization is also host to such Black conservatives as Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams. Supported by corporations which supply about 1/3 of its annual income of more than $2 million, this organization, through its Center for New York Policy Studies, is highly influential in the Giuliani administration of New York City, who I mentioned earlier. It also sponsors another center in Washington, which enrolls and utilizes highly conservative Black and Hispanic scholars to vigorously attack what it perceives as liberal, pro-Black, pro-minority governmental policies and programs, as well as the Afrocentric movement and Black nationalism. Hello. So that was page 182. Hello. So you see there's a plethora of think tanks, a plethora of policy formation, policy planning groups who are funded by corporate interest in the main. There are one or two who look like they're ostensibly aimed at doing something that's a bit more in the liberal direction. You might say the progressive direction, but the vast majority of them are all pushing in the other direction. And then reading that, it really gives you. I wish I'd have read this. I wish I'd have read this book back then. I don't know if I'd have been able to understand it all back then, 26 years ago. But I wish I'd have read it, because the rise of George W. Bush would have made a whole lot more sense. And what happened in to the United States after that time in particular. Obviously, there wasn't. I mean, Clinton. It's not a revolution, but it was just like a change in degree, real change in degree, not in kind, of what happened there in the United States. So, very, very, very interesting stuff. Really, really useful stuff. I'm very glad to be reading this book. I really, really am. It takes discipline. And I'm so pleased. I'm so blessed to have you guys reading along with us with me as well, and commenting and sharing your insights as well. Because this is a serious book. This is not a sexy book. Let's just put it that way. You know, it's not going to get front page headlines, this sort of stuff. But it's really edifying to be getting through this. So asante sana, asanteni sana, all of you guys, man. Thank you so much for this. Thank you, Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu, you said also 360 Degrees of Power album by Sister Soldier. I'll check that out. Anthony McPhail, asante, karibu sana, udo na ungozi, my brother. Peace and blessings to you too. English Gal 234, you said really enjoyed. I really enjoyed your input as ever and as usual. And Anthony McPhail again, you said Abibi Fahodi, Abibi Tumi, peace to the chat. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And Sugar Booger, see you next time as well. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. Take good care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday afternoons, I believe it is. Enjoy the rest of your days. I'm going to enjoy the last little half an hour of chill time before bed here. Take care. And yeah, hopefully see you guys next either Saturday or Sunday afternoon your time, evening my time. I'll let you know in the comments. I'll let you know in the community tab and on Facebook and so on as well when it's going to be. All right. Take care. Blessed love, my people. And see you soon. All right. Peace. Salama. Kwaherini.